Welcome back to Culture Crush. Today on the show, we're talking about the secret fifth element of emotional intelligence. And I'm delighted to say that we're welcoming Justin Bariso back to the show. Justin, it's so good to welcome you back.
Dan, thank you for having me. I always enjoy being on your show and our conversations, so I'm really happy to be here.
It's kind of a funny moment because I've had a couple of returning guests on the show, but normally they're like 20 episodes apart. Now, this is going to be episode 63, and you were my guest for episode 60. So although a significant chunk of time has passed in life, it's actually, you've only missed a few episodes and you're already back. So thank you for making another hole in your schedule for this. And it's not the only hole you've made for me recently. You actually joined me for an episode of Culture Crush Live. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, the Culture Crush community is kind of like wild group of 1,500 people from around the world. It's kind of like a lovely kind of chaos. People coming in and out at different points and tuning in and out at different points. But regularly we get together for these Culture Crush Live sessions where we get to meet fantastic experts like Justin here. And we talk about some stuff around leadership and what it means to be a founder and the challenges of emotional intelligence. And, it's a challenging world out there at the moment. So we're dealing with some of these big life questions. And what we do in those live sessions is we basically curate these podcast episodes. So Justin brought an excellent presentation on the secret fifth element of emotional intelligence. We then unpack it as a group. We share some time reflecting as a group. And the stuff that conversation produces shapes what we're going to talk about in this episode. So if you want to contribute to one of these episodes, come along to Culture Crush Live. It'd be great to see you. But I'm really excited, Justin, to dive back into this with you this afternoon. But before we do any of that, Justin, I would love to hear give us a bit of a reminder about you. Like, what are you trying to get done in the world?
Sure. So I work in the emotional intelligence space. So I basically teach people. I work with organizations as well, trying to help people learn how to understand and manage their emotions. And I'm big on like catchphrases and mottos and self-talk expressions. So a few of those. So I like to say that emotional intelligence is making emotions work for you instead of against you. So in other words, emotional intelligence is all about not getting rid of your emotions, but keeping your emotions in balance and leveraging them to reach your goals instead of them hindering you from reaching your goals. And so that's why make them work for you instead of against you. And I also love the expression, almost everything is emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is almost everything because we're emotional creatures. So emotions underpin our decisions. They are the foundation of our relationships and, XYZ. So basically there's just so much of it, or it just touches on so many things. And my goal is to help people to develop their emotional intelligence so they make better decisions, they have better relationships, and they're better able to reach their goals.
You get lots of talk online about how if you're starting your own business or you're running your own thing, you should niche down, like get really, really specific about a topic. And it's kind of interesting because emotional intelligence is one of those things where, yeah, I guess you're kind of being an expert on like one topic, but that topic just happens to be like all of existence, right?
Well, that's why I love it, and it's funny because when I wrote the book, EQ Applied, that was my publisher's advice was you really have to niche down. We have to make this either a business book or a personal book. And so we did kind of lean towards business, but I tried really hard to touch both because I feel like, whatever you practice in the workplace, you're able to take it home and it makes you a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend. And then in turn, as you practice these skills at home, it makes you a better manager, it makes you a better team player, all of these things. So I really feel like it's this self-feeding cycle, and you can try to separate it, but it's work, it's life, it's all of the above.
100%. And I've actually got a few questions that I'm going to come back to that actually in just a moment, about how these things impact the broad spectrum of life. But before we get there, I always want to start these episodes now by asking the audience to consider some questions as they listen to us talk. because this stuff is reflective. This stuff has to be personal. And whilst you listen to Justin and I's conversation, I want you to consider these 3 questions just to help set the tone. Number 1, what is the secret that you think makes people successful? Think about entrepreneurs or people you admire at work or people you admire in your family. What is the stuff that you think is going on under the hood for them that makes them successful in your eyes? Number 2, what are the character traits that you're really investing in? And now this is a tough question because it's easy to think, oh, I want to practice patience, or I'm just trying to be a good person or say nice things about ourselves. But you also see characters show up online who say, I'm a no BS person. And they kind of have these little catchphrases about themselves, which actually is about giving them permission to not really be that kind often. And so what are your character traits that are showing up all the time? Like, which ones are you really practicing, if you're honest? And don't worry, Justin, I won't ask you to be diving into your what do you really want to expose on the podcast? We won't be doing that. Well, you're more than welcome to. I'm sure it'll make it a fascinating episode.
We'll see where the conversation takes us.
Indeed. And then the 3rd question, do you find yourself reacting and regretting, or reflecting and responding? We all know what that's like. And just be honest with yourself in your day-to-day and the busyness of it all. Are you finding yourself reacting and regretting too often? I just want you to hold those 3 questions. The secret that you think makes other people successful in your eyes. What character traits are you really putting your time into, if you're being honest with yourself? And do you find yourself reacting and regretting too often? Just hold on to those things as we go forward. Now, Justin, before we dive into the rest of the episode, you were talking about how these things that we practice when it comes to emotional intelligence really affect us at home and in the other places that we need to express those traits. And this is a question I ask every one of my guests now. Are you ready in this episode to change your life? It's a big dramatic question, but do you think you could handle the pressure?
Well, hey, I think we need to constantly be changing, learning, growing. So I'm here. I'm ready, Dan.
You know, it sounds big, and I delivered it with some serious kind of weight. But I think it's a really, really important question, because I know there are people who are going to be listening to this who are going to make a different kind of decision at work tomorrow based on some of the things that we talk about. Or they're going to be faced with a pressurized situation and they're going to choose a different reaction based on this conversation. There are going to be arguments that are avoided at home because people are thinking about what we're discussing here. So it might seem like a grand statement to be like, are you ready to change your life? But actually, if we can move the dial for 1 or 2 people in some small ways, those are the kind of ripples that make a big difference over time. So no pressure, but our lives are in your hands, Justin, for the next 30 minutes.
No pressure. No, I agree 100% with the whole, we're looking for big changes, but it's actually the small, consistent changes that make the most difference.
That's it. The small stuff that you can practice. And it starts with this secret 5th element of emotional intelligence. I'm not on the edge of my seat, but emotionally I am. Why don't you talk to us about the secret 5th element? Put us out of our misery. Go for it.
All right. So just, why 5th element? So emotional intelligence, generally speaking, we talk about 4 abilities, and that is self-awareness. So being aware of my own emotions and understanding them and how that they influence my mood, the decisions I make, what I say, what I do. You talked a few minutes ago about regret. What role do emotions play in me saying or doing things that I regret at times? That's all self-awareness. Self-management, that's the second ability. That's actually being able to do something about it. So not only do we recognize and understand those emotions, but now we can exert a bit of control over it. We can hold ourselves back from speaking or doing those things that we regret, at least to an extent. We're all imperfect. We're all going to make mistakes, but we have more control over it. The third one is social awareness. So you take that self-awareness and being that understanding of our emotions and how they affect us, and now you apply that to others. You can understand how emotions affect others and how their mood is affecting them, and how though we may not know everything that's going on in their life, we recognize there are things going on in their life that can make them act differently. It will influence their decision making. It will influence what they say and do. Empathy is a big part of this, being able to get into another person's head and to be able to relate to their feelings. This is all social awareness. And then the fourth ability is relationship management, where you basically take all these three things, the self-awareness, the self-management, the social awareness, and now you use that understanding to be able to exert control over your relationships, and not in a weird kind of way or a manipulative kind of way, although I have spoken about the dark side of emotional intelligence, so I do believe that exists. But we're talking about positively being able to influence those relationships. So being able to be beneficial and helpful to others, and to leverage what they can do for you, again, in a mutually beneficial type way. So those are the four main abilities. Now, what is the fifth, and why do we call it a secret fifth ability? Hold on, pause for dramatic effect. Okay.
That was very effective. That was very effective.
So for about a decade now, I have studied successful business leaders, entrepreneurs, professional athletes, coaches, teams. We're talking about people like Barbara Corcoran and Damon John and Mark Cuban on Shark Tank, and CEOs like ex-CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, and Satya Nadella from Microsoft. And again, professional athletes, Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, LeBron James. And as I studied these people, I saw different traits, different personality traits, different skill sets. Some of them are more opinionated. Some of them are more closely guarded with their opinions. Some of them would describe themselves as more extroverted, some more introverted. But one quality that I saw over and over and over again is resilience. And that's why I call this the secret fifth element of emotional intelligence. And it's kind of cheating a little bit because strictly speaking, it falls under the umbrella of self-management. If you think about what we talked about a few minutes ago, being able to manage your emotions and exert self-control, this is basically what resilience is. But like I said, within self-management, that's a big umbrella, and you'll see different strengths and weaknesses among different people under that one ability of self-management. But resilience we see over and over and over again. And what do we mean by resilience? Because most people probably know, most of your audience knows, but just to get us all on the same page, resilience is that ability to fight through challenging situations and to bounce back from adversity. So to go through a difficult thing and then to come back from it. And we compare it to that spring that's under pressure, but when you let it go, it returns to its normal shape and form. And that's what resilient people are able to do. They're able to fight through challenges, but they're also able to bounce back when they go through difficult situations.
Thinking about that spring that bounces back, I guess it's a bit like muscle memory. We're going to talk about the practices associated with resilience, right? And we're going to be thinking about it as something that you need to invest time into. But I guess like any muscle, it can be easy to think, because lots of people will hear you say resilience and they'll think like, oh, I could have guessed that, or kind of like, oh, that kind of feels a bit obvious. But I guess it's one of those things that until you need to rely on resilience, are you intentionally building that muscle when you don't need it? Because the thing with muscle memory, right, is that you train for the race before the race begins. And then you have the muscle memory that enables you to react quickly. You mentioned Michael Jordan, right? You make a practice of 1,000,000 layups, your muscles get used to it. So when that big game moment comes, you can take that shot, you can make that shot because you've practiced it so much. But I do think that with something like resilience, we often don't think about it in the day-to-day. And then when the crisis comes, when the speed bump comes, when something happens in your job, it's like, I don't really know how to respond to that situation because I've not actually been investing in this fifth element that I need to pay attention to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, different people develop resilience for different reasons. We say that it's not an inherited trait although, it can be debated how much is inherited or not, but it is a trait that you can develop and you can practice. And we look at these successful people, there may be different reasons why they develop this trait. So one of the examples we talked about was Barbara Corcoran, right? And there's this great story about how she actually got fired from Shark Tank before she filmed a single episode. And basically what happened was she was told that she was hired. She went out and bought a new wardrobe. It's great how she tells the story. She talks about getting her plane ticket. She's going to Hollywood. She's telling all her friends. And then she gets a call from not the producer, but the producer's secretary saying they've decided to go in another direction and they actually chose somebody else. And so Barbara says she, gets all into her feelings. She feels bad for whatever amount of time. But then she says, no, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to take matters in my own hands. And she writes this email to the producer of Shark Tank. And she says, it's a pretty great email. She actually shared it on LinkedIn. And it says a lot of things, but it basically talks about her stories of resilience through her life and things that happen, like the fact that she was dyslexic and called dumb when she was in grammar school, but she was able to come back from that, and how I can't remember if she sued Donald Trump or Donald Trump sued her, and she was told she's not going to see a penny of this, but she won her case, or how her boyfriend of 7 years, it turned out to be her business partner, ran off with her secretary and basically broke up the business. And she keeps coming back from all these things. So she says, you know what? I do my best when my back is up against the wall, and I'm getting on this plane and I'm going to see you on the studio, and I hope that you make the right decision. And what happens? Well, the rest is history, we might say, because she was one of the original sharks, and she's been on the show ever since its inception here in the United States. And sharing that story, those experiences that she went through, no doubt helped her form resilience, but not just the experiences themselves, but Barbara talks a lot about the support of her mother and how strong of a figure her mother was. So let's say we didn't have that strong parental figure, or we didn't have those experiences that we went through. It could be a million different things. We may not develop the same type of resilience. So if we don't, that's where these mental and emotional exercises come in, where we can actually have targeted practice, just like you would work a bicep or a tricep and target that muscle and do certain exercises to build it. I believe we can also use targeted exercises to build our resilience muscle, so to speak.
It's interesting hearing you talk about the kind of context and how that the role models and perhaps cultural influences that you've had around you might influence your relationship with resilience, and kind of playing into that self-awareness piece, actually. Because Kate, in Culture Crush Live, she's from Eastern European background, I believe, whereas you're stateside, and I'm a Brit in the middle somewhere. And actually, when you think about how we approach resilience, we really approach it with a different kind of emotional mindset. Kate was talking about the fact that where she's from in her culture, there isn't this kind of pat on the back, like attaboy culture. It's more kind of like tough and grit. It's like you're expected to work. Whereas perhaps stateside, there is more of a culture of praise and kind of encouragement and, celebration of people's effort. So that's just an interesting thought. Have you got any thoughts about that kind of cultural tension?
Yeah, definitely. So just to clarify, because I know some listeners that may know my background, I actually live in Germany now, where my wife is from. So I'm originally from the United States, born and raised there, but have been here for the last over a decade at this point. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it is very tense. It is almost opposite ends of the spectrum, where you kind of get a wide range in the States, but generally speaking, especially in recent years, it's a lot about commendation and lifting people up. And in Germany, it's the opposite. It's very similar to the Eastern European, where there's even a German saying, nicht geschimpft ist genug gelobt, which translated means, if you're not getting cussed out or if you're not getting scolded, that's enough praise. That's all the praise you need. So very, very opposite. So all I say, okay, there's strengths and weaknesses to every culture. There's research to show the positive effects of commendation and praise. Of course, everything has to be kept in balance too, right? Because taken too far, and if it's not sincere and if it's not specific, then it's not going to have the desired results. One thing that we talked about, Kate, I remember from the meetup, was because I think she mentioned she was actually trained as a professional tennis player, and how they were taught there are some points you just have to let go. It's interesting because I've studied a couple of tennis players in connection with this topic of resilience, Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer, and they both said similar things, which is, sometimes you have to let it go. You have to accept what happened. For example, Novak Djokovic talks about the difference between the champions, the ones that are at the highest level, is not having the negative feelings, because when something bad happens, you're going to feel negative, you're going to feel down. But for him, it's being able to embrace that, to lean into that. Okay, accept that. But how long do you stay in those negative feelings? Because that's the difference in the champions, is they're able to now come out of that. And so sometimes resilience is letting something go, giving something up, but now still being able to bounce back and move forward, and not, oh, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe I lost my job. Now what am I going to do? And, it affects you for weeks or months or a year or longer, or whatever it is. It can be very small things sometimes. Oh, my friend canceled plans on me. I can't believe it. Nobody likes me. I'm not making plans with anyone ever again, and maybe that person does, but how long does it take them to bounce back? Does it take them a month before they try to make plans again when they really want to make plans? Or are they back on the horse the next day or a couple days later? And here's what we're talking about with resilience. Again, it's fighting through those challenges, or sometimes taking the L, accepting the loss, but then coming right back the next day, a couple days later, as quickly as possible. That's resilience.
It brings us back to that idea of reacting and regretting and reflecting and responding. The crucial part in reflecting and responding is the response. Like, there is a kind of like, what's your response going to be? Is it going to be a decision to let something go and say, hey, we just got to move on from this one? Or is the response, it's the next point, I need to get back in the game? And creating that space to kind of think through our response and then choosing a path forward. But neither of those are passive. Like, letting something go and choosing to put something down is still an act of your will. It's still a choice that you're making. And I think it's really crucial as we talk through the subject of resilience. It's about your choices. Like, resilience isn't about, and I know that I'm sort of like riffing here and now talking about your specialist area, but I want to say to people, like, it's not about you just being stoic and just kind of like being tough to what's happening around you. It is actually about your ability to move and think and consider and choose a response. You're still active in that. There's nothing in this which is about you being passive, which probably brings us quite nicely really onto the second area that we discussed at Culture Crash Live, which is, and we've been touching on this already, so you might feel that we've covered it, but you might want to elaborate further. But what makes it such an invaluable trait in your view?
Yeah, well, like you said, we talked about it a bit. We're all going to face those negative situations, those negative circumstances. That's a fact of life. So that's one. There's actually three things that I talk about, three specific reasons that make it so valuable. One, we face negative experiences, all of us. So to be able to come back from those helps us to reduce the impact of those experiences. Number two is negativity bias. So research shows that, at least in the short term, we tend to remember more of the negative things than the positive things. And to illustrate that, think about the last bad day you had. Probably 9 or 10 good things happened that day. But one bad thing, and what do you remember? So that's the negativity bias. We tend to remember those bad things, and they can easily get us down. That's number two. Number three, and this doesn't affect everyone, but we talk about the personality traits, the big five. We won't get too much into that today, but basically the basic personality traits that we all have, and one of those is neuroticism. And neuroticism is your tendency towards negative feelings and emotions. And some of us lean more towards one end of the spectrum than the other, meaning we tend towards negative feelings. So in addition to the negativity bias, we even more than the average person tend to have negative feelings and think about negative things. And that's not all bad. Having negative feelings and negative thoughts can be helpful. It can move you to check out, you're very worried about what could be a minor health issue that others would ignore, but you're worried about it, and then it turns out to be a major health issue, right? So there's some positive to it, but many times it can affect you adversely. It can make you more prone to depression, all these negative things. So those are the three main reasons. Negative situations that we all face, negativity bias that we all have, and where we are in the neurotic or neuroticism spectrum, which may cause us to even lean more into negative feelings than others. And that's, again, working that resilience muscle can help you battle all three of those things.
Justin recently, a guy called Justin Foster, he was on the show. It'll probably be the previous episode to this one, episode 62. And it was all about how your soul doesn't care about the algorithm. And we had a really interesting, before I talk about that, there's another side note here, is that I've got a guy called Justin Hills coming up on the podcast. So my world is just full of people called Justin, which has been a very pleasant surprise.
I'm usually the only Justin people know, or one of them, but
there's something in the world right now about the army of Justins with something to say coming out to the fore. But Justin Foster, who's become a great friend of mine over this last year, we were talking about imposter syndrome. So not kind of neuroticism more broadly, but the specifics around imposter syndrome and things that give you the ick. And he phrased it in a really nice way. He said that, and it relates to your point about how you might be somebody who over-indexes on that a bit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. He had a slightly different spin here, where he talked about the fact that sometimes when you experience imposter syndrome, it might be because in some way you are potentially being slightly an imposter. And actually, that's not a bad thing. He said it's a signal from the soul that's reminding you to be you, right? If you think, oh, I feel a bit kind of out of place in this room, or I don't think I've got permission, that actually that might be something deep within you saying, okay, so where do you really fit here? Or what's the thing you want to ask for? Or I mean, I'm elaborating on what we discussed, but I thought that was a really nice idea, that sometimes your neuroticism, that kind of like icky or uncomfortable feeling you might get, might be a good thing. It might be your soul trying to say to you, like, actually, you're not quite being yourself here. Like, I want you to pay attention to something here that otherwise you might have missed. I wish, right, growing up, that I had a better relationship with imposter syndrome, because when I was younger, I could be quite cocky and abrasive sometimes. I could be overconfident. And I would go into meetings or conversations with people I didn't know that well and just overdo it, right? Whereas if I perhaps had a little bit of a bit more nervousness around that, or maybe I was just kind of aware of that I was a bit of an imposter in that situation, it may have just tempered me in those moments a little bit, right? Could have been a good thing. You were going to say something.
No, I really love that take, because it goes back to the emotional intelligence principle of not seeing negative feelings, emotions as 100% bad. We don't like to feel them, but what are they? Well, we call those feelings and emotions, we compare it to a compass. It gives us direction. It lets us know, okay, something's wrong here. Why is something wrong? Either I need to change how I feel about the situation, or as you've mentioned here, maybe it's a sign to me that I need to change something. And so, yeah, I really love that take.
So the secret fifth element, resilience, we've discussed at good length about kind of why it's a valuable trait. And I love the journey we've been on with that point. Third part, how do you start building it? How do you start developing that muscle? How do you start practicing using it?
Yeah. So we talk about targeted exercise, right? And we've kind of split those up into two types of exercise. So there's the first type, which is building your inner resources. And this helps you to build kind of your reservoir of resilience so that you're able to fight through the challenges. Remember, we talked about two things of resilience. It's fighting through challenges and it's bouncing back. The other type of exercise is what we call cognitive reframing, which is a fancy way of just saying changing your perspective. So, you're going through a difficult situation, change the way you look at it so that you make it easier to deal with, or you know how to deal with it. So we talk about two types of exercises. So one is building the inner resources, and that gives you something to draw from. It helps you to become more resilient in the everyday. And then another type of exercise is cognitive reframing. And that's just a fancy way of changing your perspective, thinking of the situation differently. And that's going to help you fight through the situation. It's also going to help you to bounce back from a difficult situation. So let's talk about a couple examples of each of them. So we talk about building inner resources. One example is something I like to call replay. Now, what is replay? Replay is when something good happens to you, and it can be something small, an interaction with someone, you get a text message, and they tell you how much they appreciated your help. What do we usually do? We look at that, we feel good for a moment, we move on with our life. I encourage you to stop, think about why this person is saying this. What did you do? What have they specifically told you that they appreciated? Sometimes they will. If they didn't tell you, stop and think. Use your imagination. What do you think you did that they especially appreciated? What do they appreciate about you as a friend and the things that you do? Another situation, you give a good presentation. People commend you afterwards. They tell you what they liked about it. That feels good. Usually we move on. I encourage you to replay that. Go back and think about what they told you they liked. Think about, kind of bask in the sunshine for a moment. Think, oh, wow, they really liked it. Go back and look at your notes or your PowerPoint and try to identify what points they really liked. Now, what is the purpose of all of this? You're building that inner resource of seeing that you have a positive effect on people. So when the bad thing happens, when an idea fails, when a presentation doesn't go so well, when you have a blow up with a friend and you think, I'm a horrible friend, or I'm horrible at presentations. No, you can think back and fight that negativity bias and remember the good moments you've had and remember these good things that have happened. And one thing I forgot to mention is really key to this is when you're taking some time to think about that is to do some journaling. And so write down what it is that people appreciated. What do I think people appreciated? What went well? Because as you do that, you're slowing down, you're putting pen to paper, you're thinking through this, and you're building that inner resource for when something goes wrong later, that you can see things aren't always going wrong, they're sometimes going right too. And it helps bring those emotions into balance. So that's one on the building inner resources. Let's talk about one with the cognitive reframing. So one that I talk about a lot is what I call the milk carton rule. And the milk carton rule is based on a real life experience in a psychology textbook where a man was having problems with his spouse, his wife. And what would happen is she would get up in the morning and she would put milk in her coffee. She had to go to work before him. She would leave the milk out on the counter. He would get up a little bit later, warm milk on the counter, warm milk in his cereal. And he's just going off to his therapist about what a big statement this is in their relationship, and she doesn't care about him, et cetera, et cetera. And, through a series of questions, the therapist finds out, well, how many times has she done this? How many times have you asked her not to do it? Okay, sometimes she does put it back, but in the rush of things, many times she forgets. And the end of the story is, was it really this huge statement on our relationship? I think anyone that's listening, if you've been in a serious relationship, there are certain things that you really try to get your partner to do that they just won't do. And is it really such a big statement in the relationship? Or is it just a victim of circumstance and situation and whatever emotional baggage they're coming in and trying to get to work on time and all those things? And so the therapist's recommended solution was, well, why don't you just buy 2 cartons of milk? Now, we could argue whether that's the best solution or not, but what does it do? It puts you in control so that you're not focused on what another person is doing, but you're actually taking the situation into control. And you're focusing on not on what you can't control, but you're focusing on what you can control. And that's the milk carton rule. And that's one of these reframes where when something bad happens to you, you get laid off, you get fired, your relationship fails, whatever it is, you get out of that feeling of learned helplessness, which is a term we use when you start to feel situation after situation that these things just happen to you, and you start to realize, no, I exert a certain amount of control over this. I can, going back to what you said a few minutes ago, Dan, I can choose how I'm going to react to this. And I can take the situation under control, and I can do certain things that's going to make the situation better. And that's an exercise that it starts small, you do it, and you look for little ways to do it. But then when the big things happen, you're able to do it there too.
Yeah, there's so many good ideas to unpack that. I've got a couple of others that I want to bring into the mix as well. But what I will say is, if you are in a relationship and you're getting upset about something like a milk carton, I think that one of the other lessons there is, and you did touch on this, is maybe there's something deeper going on. Maybe, and I'm sort of saying with a smile, but also there's a feeling in my heart that somebody out there might hear that and go, "Oh yeah, maybe there's something else going on." Yeah, maybe it's time to talk to somebody, because milk carton, there's probably a deeper story that might need to be addressed. So we said we were going to change lives. Maybe we just saved a relationship. Who knows? Let's hope so.
Hopefully.
But it reminds me that in our live session, Justin Hills, the other Justin, the third Justin, in the trilogy of Justins, he was talking about reframing in this lens. Like, what's the advice that you would give yourself? So imagine if you're in a tough spot, imagine that somebody else was telling you about that situation. What advice would you give them? Right? I think that was it, right? I don't know if I'm remembering that correctly from your perspective, but I thought that was a great take.
Yeah, exactly. And I use this one as well. And one of the things I try to add to it is, imagine you're 5 years down the road, you're out of the situation that you're in now. You've made whatever decisions you've made. Try to imagine how it works out. Now, for better or for worse, what advice would you give someone else that's in that situation now? And that's great because it helps us to kind of remove ourselves, not completely emotionally, because we don't want to suppress emotions, but it just helps bring those emotions into balance. And many times, I like to use the illustration, like I don't know if you're a chess player, but for any in the audience that play chess, if you're watching somebody else play chess and you see a move, it's like, oh, how could he make that move? Or how could she make that move? But when you're in the hot seat, it's a completely different story, right? We make those same mistakes. We don't realize those things. And so that tool of what advice would you give, it kind of takes you out of the hot seat for a moment, so you can see the bigger picture, see from a broader perspective, and then it can help you to think in a way that brings logic and emotions more into balance.
Yeah, I think that the idea of how do you kind of create some breathing space between you and the situation, I think, is a really interesting one. I've talked about this on another episode recently, but when I was about 17, I was about to give a presentation to a room of people that at the time I felt were really important. I'm not sure I would look back and agree with that assessment now, but at the time I was really nervous about giving this presentation. And I don't know why, but for some reason I stood outside the door of that room and I whispered out loud to myself, "I'm not afraid to fail." Now, specifically, it wasn't about kind of like winning or losing in that situation. It wasn't like pass or fail. It was mainly about the fact that I felt nervous that I was going to stumble over my words, or I was going to lose my place, or, I was going to embarrass myself somehow in front of a group of people. Right? I was on a little stage and I was nervous about it. But there was something about reminding myself and having that little catchphrase in my head, "I'm not afraid to fail," that just kind of said to me, if you stumble over your words, no one cares. Honestly, no one's looking out for that stuff, really. And they might notice it if you then freeze and unable to respond to that, but no one's going to worry if you stumble over a few words and then move on. And it was about, and there's something I'm not sure about the kind of the neuroscience behind this, but there's something that I found really helpful, and I've used it as a technique often since, about actually saying something and hearing it back, activating different parts of my brain. Do you know something about the neuroscience here?
Well, I was just going to say, this is great, Dan. And this is actually the end goal. As we teach people these exercises and these tools, the goal is, and that's why we teach different ones, because different ones will resonate with different people. And as they practice these, they'll start to develop their own, like what you just did in developing something, this positive self-talk expression that resonates with you, that you can say out loud, that causes you to slow down and cognitively reframe and think differently. And about the neuroscience, what scientists have discovered in the last, it's a few decades at this point, but it's very different from what they used to think years and years ago, which is we were pretty much set in the way we deal with situations and how resilient we are and our personalities, set from a relatively early age. But what they've discovered since then is no, our brains are what they call plastic, neuroplasticity. They're always changing, growing. And so when we put ourselves in experiences, when we practice these exercises, we're actually changing the connections, those synapses, and we're changing how those neural circuits work. And the more we do it, because imagine if you're treating a certain situation the same way for years or decades, then it's going to take some time. But gradually, as you do it the new way and you practice and you exercise, you will eventually change how you react and respond in those situations.
That's such an important point. And we're actually going to start coming into land in a moment, but I've got one other person I wanted to mention in this space of cognitive reframing. But I think your point there about practice is just so key. The number of people I meet in my line of work who say, oh, that won't work for me. And maybe have tried it once or like watched the documentary about it or something like that. And then gone, hey, that's not for me. There is something to be said about like how often people talk about meditation and mindfulness or some kind of like worshipful or spiritual practice. Like there is a reason why these ideas really, really endure, because it's about that rhythm. It's about that discipline. It's about that reinforcement. It's about that kind of creating those new pathways within your brain. And yeah, something might not work right away, but would it work in a week or two, right? Could you create enough time to really test that thing out for yourself? And what I promise you is this, actually, like if you do pick a practice and you start to run with it, the kind of higher level practice maybe isn't that specific tool is the one for you. Maybe the most important thing is that actually though you're beginning to practice a different category of emotional well-being. So maybe it is that if you choose a breathing exercise, yeah, that breathing exercise might not have been the one that was right for you. But actually above that is the fact that you are beginning to try new things. And it's easier to steer a ship that's moving, right? You can get to the end of that week or that 2 weeks and go, well, maybe I'll try a different one. But actually, maybe it's more about the you trying than you picking the right thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that goes back to how hard some of this is and how easy people think it is. Like when I was young, I loved basketball. And, I practiced shooting a basketball and I thought, oh, if I practice this much every day, then I'll develop a great jump shot. And sadly, I never did. And that's because you have to shoot thousands of shots before you develop a really good jump shot. And it's the same with all these practices. And that's why we encourage daily journaling. Again, it doesn't take an hour, 2 hours, no, 5-10 minutes a day. But when you get into this daily practice, now is when you really start to make those small, consistent changes that have the biggest impact.
When you mentioned jump shot, the reason why I was smiling is because I think I was talking about Michael Jordan earlier and talking about layups. Now, I'm a Brit. I don't know nothing about basketball. I know who Michael Jordan is, of course. So if anybody heard me talk about layups and thought, that sounded ridiculous coming out of your mouth, then maybe I should have picked jump shot as a better reference point. But
it was all good, Dan.
It would have been super cringe had I started talking about slam dunks. So if you are listening, thank yourself that didn't happen.
Are you a basketball imposter, Dan?
I'm definitely getting a feeling of imposter syndrome right now. And it is a signal from my soul to stop talking about basketball. But what I will say is this. A friend of mine joined us for Culture Crash Live. His name's Dave, and he didn't actually say this on the call. And he doesn't know this because I don't think we've ever talked about it. But years ago, I was going through an extraordinarily painful breakup. I had been with my partner for 8 years. There was family complications, and the pressure of those family complications, I think contributed to our relationship not working out. But after 8 years, we both were incredibly invested in trying to fight for this love that we had. And after we both broke up, my friend Dave, he called me up, and this kind of relates to cognitive reframing. And he just said this, he said, just remember this. He said, I know it's really, really painful, but just remember, nothing is wasted. And that's another phrase that I have lent on over the years, that when my back is up against the wall, I've been through 5 redundancies, as you know, in the last 11 years. And, you know, pandemics, acquisitions, you name it, I've been on the wrong side of it. And it could feel really, really unfair. But that thought that nothing is wasted, that little cognitive reframe, has been so helpful for me over the years. So Dave, if you're listening, thank you so much. That little conversation we had meant an awful lot to me.
But
awesome. Justin, we're out of time, my friend. There's so much more we could say. There's about 100 other great conversations that we could have. But thanks again, Justin, for making some more time for the Culture Crush podcast. And let's make sure that we speak again soon.
Always a pleasure. Appreciate you inviting me, Dan, and enjoyed it very much.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please do your thing and like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a Culture First leader, be sure to visit anthem.oo and make sure you join us for the next Culture Crush Live. It'd be great to see you there.